the go live button. Let's go. It takes usually just a couple of seconds to propagate or whatever they are doing there on the background. So, hello everyone. It's another session for the Cloud Study Network, and we have great speakers today. We have with us Teresa Fung and Rich Hutton is right? Or
yep, that's correct.
Okay, great. So yeah, we can straight switch to Teresa. She can introduce herself and her background, and then we will switch to Rich. Let's go.
Hello, everybody. First of all, thank you, Karen, for inviting me to the event. I'm really excited to be here. And my name is Teresa Fung. I am an interview coach and the founder of Teresa Fung Consulting, also known as HowHiringManagersThink.com. And I partner with Chorus, which is a coaching marketplace. And that platform enables me to help their members globally to land their dream jobs. So previously, I worked for Amazon as a software engineering manager and an interview bar raiser. I served over several hundred interviews during my tenure, and I also built my team as well. So I have some experience in hiring myself. I guess I hand the mic over to Rich for his introduction as well. Rich.
Yes, thanks, Teresa. Hi, everyone. My name is Rich Hutton. Hello from Southern Florida here in the U.S. Very excited to be here today and talk to you all to kind of give you an insight into the thinkings of hiring managers and how the interview process may have changed over the last year or so. To give you all a bit of background on myself, I'm a former Apple hiring manager and recruiter. I spent a number of years there between London and in the U.S., and currently I work for the largest research and advisory company in the world in an HR capacity. Also, I was a senior recruiter there too, and have recently moved into a programmatic lead role looking at the world of talent intelligence. And all at the same time, really enjoying myself as an interview coach with Karis, along with Teresa here. And so we're really excited to be able to kind of share with you some tips and tricks, shall we say, around best practices for interviews. And hopefully by the end of this session, everyone will walk away with a little more confidence and maybe even want to connect with us and talk to us at some point because that's what we're here to do. We're here to help as much as we can. So yeah, great to meet you all.
That's great. That's amazing. We have amazing professionals today. Maybe before we dive into the presentation itself and into the talks, we have two talks. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit because Teresa, you just mentioned the term bar raiser, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is like people who are involved with Amazon, AWS, they pretty well know the term. But could you a little bit just explain what it means for the general public?
Definitely. So Amazon has this program called the Interview Bar Raiser, which is a small community, but then and this group of people need to go through a rigorous training in terms of how to lead interviews, evaluate candidates, as well as serving the interview panel. And the main responsibility for the bar raiser, people might think that the bar raiser interview sessions might be tougher or harder questions, but it's actually lesser about the candidate experience. It's more on making sure everybody on the interview panel evaluate the candidate against the same standard, and that is the main job of the bar raiser. So that a few duties, including making sure they gather relevant evidence, because Amazon's interview process is evidence-based, so that we make sure everybody collect objective, fact-based evidence, as well as evaluating against the proper hiring standards. And that is the bar raiser program.
Yeah. So I guess Amazon has very high average bar like within the corporation itself, like because they're very careful when they're choosing new people who joins them. But being a bar raiser, I guess it's just like you are looking even for people of even higher standards, like who will raise the average bar of the corporation even further to the top, right?
Right. So the It's an Amazon hiring practice, to look for candidates who raise the bar. And what it means is, hiring someone that is better than what the verbiage is better than 50% of those on the same team and in a similar position and job level. And as you see, when we keep hiring people, who raises the bar will just keep going up, right? And that's why the bar raiser also need to continuously calibrate the bar with the interviewing panel to make sure we are keeping up with the standard as well.
That's great, amazing. And Rich, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on this question. Who is a hiring manager? Because is there like a position at the company which is like a hiring manager, or how could you explain it, please?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it does depend on the company, but 9 times out of 10, a hiring manager is the actual individual that has the open position on their role that you are applying for the job to join. In some companies, what they will have is they will have designated interviewers who will then run the interviews and then just say whether or not you're going to move forward. And you may not be on their team specifically, but they have just been designated as trained in interviewing techniques. They may have a really good way of speaking with candidates, strong candidate care to make sure that candidates are performing their best in interviews. But you may not be assigned to that team that person is necessarily on. But again, that's not as common anymore. More often or not, the hiring manager is the person that you are actually going to be joining the team of and will be your leader in some capacity in the future.
Yeah. So basically, it means someone needs an employee who will report to him or her or them, and they're just in the process of looking for candidates or like at candidates. And this is the person who is called in this situation a hiring manager, right? They can be anything. They can be like whatever, like a solution architect or like a product manager or something like this.
That is correct. Yeah, it is agnostic of what your role title may or may not be. You are ultimately designated the hiring manager as soon as you have that open position on your team. In many instances, a lot of interview processes will involve more than one hiring manager. So you might meet with 2 or 3 people individually. You might have a final round interview, like a panel style interview where you're sitting and speaking with 3 or 4 people all at the same time. You would still, in theory, call all of them hiring managers because they are all interviewing you. But ultimately, the hiring manager is the person who has the open position on their team.
That's a great explanation for newbies, because we also in our community, and I think generally in tech and IT, there are a lot of newbies, people who are just graduating at universities and they want to enter this market. And there are some terms and some buzzwords which it's really helpful to understand what's actually behind it. So thank you both, Teresa and Rich, for explaining these terms. And we have right now about 50 people in the call who are watching the stream, and the number of people is growing constantly as they're tuning in. But I think for now we can jump into the presentation.
Let's do it. Okay.
All right.
Yes.
Bring this up. Hopefully everyone can see.
Yeah, we can see the screen now. That's great. Just one remark to all the attendees: please stay until the end of the call. Despite that, you will learn a lot of very helpful, very interesting insights about the career and job and all related stuff. But at the end, you will also receive a unique white paper, which you will not find anywhere, even commercially. So make sure to stay until the end. It will be shared among the attendees of this call. So that's it. Let's go.
So thank you, Karen. So Rich and I put together this presentation for the event to share some thoughts on the job interview process in 2021, and some of the perspective from the hiring manager and interviewers. And when Karen reached out to us about the event, I wonder what might be an interesting topic on the job interview. A few thoughts come to mind, frameworks perhaps, or preparation tips or maybe interview days advice. But then I thought, how about we go back to the basics and talk, and ask ourselves this question, what is a job interview? Do we have a good understanding of it? So let's have a look at that. So a job interview, right? Generally speaking, the common understanding of this is that it is a process to test your skills and see whether you can do the job. So most people enter their interviews thinking, if I answer all the questions or the more questions that I answered correctly, then the better I am over the other candidates. And because of that, I will get the job. Right? Sounds pretty straightforward. And with this mindset, people prepare their job interviews by studying, just like they study for an exam. So they look up interview questions, there are gazillions of them on the internet. They practice as much as they can, and they try to cover all the domains within their job function and perfect their answer along the way, leading up to their interview day. So again, this method, very straightforward, pretty logical, easy to follow. After all, studying for an exam, I believe most of us has experience on that. We have been student at some point, and this approach, for us is, a very familiar way to prepare. However, if this method is working so well, how come people still come to me or come to coaches asking, I thought I did really well on my interview, but why didn't I get the job, right? They are scratching their head, with all these question marks. So as you see, something doesn't quite add up here, but what is it? So the study approach mostly works, except it has one tiny little flaw. The job interview is not an exam. Surprise everybody. So interviewers are not trying to quiz you, nor they are looking for the perfect answers. So as you answer the questions and think you do really well and adding up the score, inside your head, the interviewers are evaluating you in a completely different way. So the score you have in your head actually has little influence towards your outcome. It's a different measurement, right? Different rulers. And this job interview myth, this exam mentality is the chasm between you and your dream job. And that is why, often this question comes, you feel that you did really well from your interview, but it ended up the expected outcome doesn't come and you didn't get the job. So if the job interview is not an exam, then what is it, right? Then why are we meeting, right? And go through all these, long day, multi-session interviews. What is it? So the job interview is not a quiz. However, it's more like a game, specifically a matching game. So before I go further into this, let's have a quick thought exercise. Right? Let's say I am a hiring manager and I'm hiring for a technical leader on my team, a principal engineers. So I have two candidates. The first candidate has technical knowledge very deep into the specific domain that this person can implement or troubleshoot any layer of the system, a complex system. And then the other candidate, the second candidate, has a broad range of understanding with various components of the system, right? It could be the system the team owns, or it could be components owned by partnering teams. But then this person has a broad understanding of how things work as a whole. So between these two candidates, which one do you think is the better candidate? Is it the first one that with a vertical technical depth? Or is it the second one who has a broad horizontal breadth, knowledge? It's difficult to choose. If you ask me, as the hiring manager, both are capable candidates. Both are good, good ones. However, most likely only one of them is a match for me. But which one? Well, it depends, right? It depends on what my need is and what my team needs, the team's need is. If my team owns a vertical domain, let's say maybe machine learning or voice recognition, something that requiring a very vertical knowledge, such that someone who probably have extensive education, PhDs, and have extensive experience in that vertical domain, then most likely the first candidate is more favorable. If my team, on the other side, perhaps own a platform, like maybe application platform or horizontal integration platform, servers, let's say, and then there are various components in the system that we integrate with my platform. In that sense, someone who has a breadth of cross-domain knowledge, who understand how they interact, how they integrate, and more importantly, the dependencies, because often if I change one thing on our platform, I could break gazillion places, right? And for that, someone with a breadth of knowledge is more preferred. So you see, whether the candidate, get the job or not, is not about how well or how perfect their answers are. It's all about relevancy, and relevancy against the hiring team's need. So in the end, it's the most relevant candidate gets the job. So you might think, if it's about relevancy, then how do we prepare for job interviews? Well, the job interview, simply put, is not a test, but then is a data collection process. The hiring managers and the interviewing teams, they meet with you with the goal to gather evidence to indicate and illustrate your relevance. And that piece of evidence will serve as the justification towards your interview outcome. So you see, it's evidence-based and fact-based. And there is no right or wrong answers in it. It's about how relevant you are to the need. So as in how to prepare for the interview, the answer is simple. Just put your relevant story together and present them at your interview, right? It sounds pretty easy, but in terms of execution, it's not that simple. There is a catch. What is relevant, right? I have all this experience. How do I know which one of my experience is relevant towards the team's need? And for that, this turned into a very complex question. Relevance means different things for different job functions. Even with the same job function, it could mean different things for different companies. Every company has their definition in terms of scopes and responsibility. And even within the same company, the same job function, the scope can still vary between job levels. So for example, if a story, right? If I present a story sharing how well I learned or how curious I am towards different technologies, that story is most likely is more relevant for junior engineers because they come into the company or come into the industry with little experience. So learning is a big part of their responsibility or within their scope. As people progress in their career, and now maybe they have 3 or 5 years experience, so they have some technical knowledge, and for that, most of their scope or their tasks involve surrounding like delivering your job, delivering your result, and maybe troubleshooting when issue comes up. And for that, with that level of experience, then your story, as in how you overcome obstacles or how you peel the onion, dig through all the layers to identify root cause independently, those become relevant story for maybe more like a mid-level engineers. And then further along the path, when you get into a senior engineer type position, the scope change again, right? Even though delivery result is still important. However, senior engineers, they are technical leaders. So a big part of their responsibility actually involves decision-making, risk assessment, and also involving mentoring your team as well. And for that, stories surrounding these areas, right? How do you make decision? Do you take calculated risk? Or how do you mitigate the risk? these stories will have a higher influence towards an interview outcome compared to the others. And that's, you see, right? So every position is different. Even within the same position, different job experience is different. So to determine the relevance, it requires someone who has extensive experience in terms of hiring, recruiting, and interviewing to be able to accurately lay out that boundary for you. And that is why, often people think, if they study and prepare and look up all this information is good enough. However, having a coaching partner who actually help you define that boundary, help you understand, for this company, the boundary is here, so that, put your story together according to this line, and maybe a different company, the line shall shift a little bit, right? But then now you have the best knowledge in terms of what to put together and how you position yourself to present the higher influence stories rather than give a story that doesn't move the needle for your interview outcome. And for that, coaches who has professional background, such as they have served as hiring managers or engineering managers, recruiters and interview bar raisers, are your strongest ally. And for that, I will hand the mic over to Rich, who will share insight on behavioral interviews.
Thank you, Teresa. So yeah, the behavioral interviews in a nutshell, they make up almost all parts of the interview process now for roles across the world, right? No matter if you're going for a large multinational company, a smaller local company, at some point, they're wanting to understand the specifics of how do you behave? What are some of your experiences like? How have you behaved in certain scenarios? And like Teresa mentioned, the interview process, the interview itself is a matching game. You're looking to try to tie in your experiences with ultimately what the hiring manager is looking for. How might you do this? Well, simply put, it's all about telling your story and showcasing not just the experiences that you've had previously, but how you've navigated that experience. How did you behave? If we look at two different candidates which had the exact same experience at the exact same company, but one candidate behaved differently, arguably better or more aligned to what that company is looking for in their experience versus somebody else, again, if that's what the hiring manager is ultimately looking for, that's going to be a better match for them. And that's where they're going to make a hiring decision to say, we'd rather go with candidate A over candidate B. I would say the vast majority of clients come to me for behavioral interview support for a number of reasons. For starters, I think there's an understanding that behavioral interviews are very stressful, that they're trying to psychologically analyze who you are, how you think, what you're doing, etc. Maybe candidates have received either poor feedback in the past or in many cases, no feedback at all. So they don't really know what to expect, how to improve, what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. And really, so the aim here of an interview coach is to help navigate you through and explain what hiring managers are looking for in the behavioral interview. I'll give you an example of a couple of times candidates have come to me. If you've done much online research around behavioral interviews, you've probably seen questions like, tell me about a time, or can you please tell me what your biggest failure was, right? Those questions, for whatever reason, seem to quite scare and worry candidates a lot of the time. But the reality is, every question that you get asked, specifically in a behavioral interview, is an opportunity for you to tell your story. It's an opportunity for you to match your experiences that you have had previously up to what that hiring manager or what that interviewer is ultimately looking for in that candidate. And in the vast majority of cases, if you've gone to a level where you're talking with a hiring manager or a senior interviewer at some stage, you've probably done those experiences somehow in the past. So the question then becomes, well, how do I know what my story is, right? How do I share my examples? What examples should I ultimately use when it comes to answering some of these behavioral interview questions? And so for this, there's a couple key considerations. The first consideration, excuse me, my dog has decided to run around with a bone for no apparent reason. Just perfect timing. The first consideration here is ultimately, what is the hiring manager looking for? And this is actually a surprisingly straightforward question, as long as you have a little bit of guidance to understand the particulars of what that is. To start off with, look at all your resources. What does the job description actually say? I know that sounds really obvious, but it's a really good place to look for in terms of what the hiring managers are wanting out of a candidate. Most of the times, and Teresa might be able to back me up on this, but most of the times, hiring managers actually play a part in crafting what the job description says. So in that case, that's a pretty good spot to look for to understand what is it that I or Teresa or any other hiring manager might ultimately be looking for. Also, think about some of the questions that you're actually being asked. Maybe a recruiter had an initial 30-minute conversation with you. Try to actually remember some of those questions, because that might be telling in terms of what type of candidate they're looking for, what experiences they might be looking for, whether or not you kind of meet that sort of baseline criteria of whether or not they want to move you forward in the interview process. Think about also times where a hiring manager might even, at the beginning, sorry, not a hiring manager, but the recruiter might even share with you some materials. Hey, here's something to think about. Here's a way to approach these interviews. Facebook actually does a very good job of this. They send over multi-page prep documents to their candidates once you get past the initial phone screen, which can help you prepare for the interviews. I mean, that's a free resource right there. There's nothing better than that to help you with your interview process. So what you'll see here is that when it comes to your story, it really is relatively straightforward in terms of what they might be looking for. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a hiring manager that asks you the question, can you tell me about a time that you worked on a team and nobody could agree upon the approach to take on that certain project? Fairly common question. A lot of people ask that. So why are they asking that question, right? What are they looking for when they ask that question? Well, to start with, it's probably a good chance that they're looking for a team player, right? Most hiring managers are wanting people that are team players that are able to work together in an environment where people might have different opinions on how to approach a problem. This is totally normal, right? That makes a lot of sense. Maybe they're also looking for someone who has the ability to work through tough situations without being scared or being put off. The question was, tell me about a time where you had a project where people have approached it differently or haven't approached it the same way. Maybe they want someone who can bring everyone together. Maybe they want someone who can, be the de facto leader in a team and put their hands up when no one else has and says, okay, hey, everyone, let's bring it all together. There are a lot of different things that hiring managers can be looking for in the questions that they're asking. But if you take just a few seconds to think about the question that's being asked and use all the other resources that you may have had at your disposal before that question has been asked, it can really help you in terms of understanding, okay, what does my answer need to be? How do I tell my story? What should it actually be? And again, chances are you've had this experience in the past. You just need to think about it. But if you haven't had the experience in the past, maybe you haven't been on many teams before, and by pure luck, everyone has agreed to the exact approach and there's been no problems whatsoever. If that's the case, you're a very lucky person, number one, but it's okay. You can absolutely say to the interviewer, you know what, I actually haven't experienced something like that necessarily in my past experiences. Would you mind maybe rephrasing the question for me? Or I do have another experience that kind of might show how I've been able to work through a tough situation. Would that work for you? That is totally okay to ask that question. Don't panic if you don't have an example to what is being asked. Just make sure you're confident in what you're saying, and whatever you do, do not try to make something up on the spot. I can say this with a pretty strong degree of confidence. Hiring managers and recruiters can usually tell quite quickly if something is being made up on the spot. And chances are we have a bunch of follow-up questions that we might ask. And if we start asking those questions and your story kind of falls apart a little bit, it's not going to be a good look. So again, make sure you're being honest. Make sure you're thinking through what the interviewer might actually be asking you based on their question, based on the materials that you're seeing. And then start thinking and say, okay, what is the story that I actually can tell here? What did I do in that example? What was the end result? This is ultimately going to make up your answer to those questions. So how do you deliver the answer, right? You've got this great experience in your brain. You've maybe taken a couple seconds to think through the answer. How do you go about delivering it? Well, this is really where interview coaches, frankly, in my opinion, can add the most insight and guidance here. This is all about how we're able to support you in making sure that you understand what the questions are that could be asked of you, and that you know the best way to deliver your answer, the best answer, confidently and ensuring that you are matching up again with what the hiring manager is wanting and your experiences. So to do this in a nutshell, right, there are three major sort of golden rules, I would say, for delivering your answer, whatever your experience or whatever your story might be. The first one, and I hope some of you are smiling or laughing at this, is answer the question. I know this sounds super obvious again, but you would be surprised how many times interviewers will ask a question and a candidate will not actually answer it. They might think they are. Maybe they don't have an answer and they kind of do what I just mentioned about making something up and then going down a tangent or a rabbit hole. But the most important thing you can do here is answer their question. If they're asking you about a time where you overachieved on a project, or you had a client where you just went above and beyond to make sure you completely satisfied whatever the request was, that's what your answer should be. It shouldn't be about a time where you failed. It shouldn't be about a time where you worked with a really difficult client, a really difficult project manager who just made your life very, very difficult. That wasn't the question, right? It really should stick with, tell me about the time where you overachieved for a candidate. That's what your answer should be. I know it sounds obvious, but trust me, that will help a lot. Next, you really want to make sure that you're delivering your answer confidently and ideally in a structured manner. What does a structured manner look like? Well, again, when you think about the format of an interview, an interviewer has a limited time period to learn as much as they possibly can about you. They do not necessarily want you or need you to tell every single little minute detail of the project, every conversation that you had with your partner that was there, every disagreement you had. They don't necessarily want that. What they're looking for is they're looking to understand what was the project or what was the situation that you were within, what tasks or what actions did you ultimately take, and what was the end result. If you're able to deliver your story, to tell your story, just following those principles, there's a good chance that your answer is probably going to take about a minute or two to deliver, and that's okay. We, and by we, I mean interviewers, have a notoriously short attention span. I apologize on behalf of all interviewers in the world, but we want to learn as much as we can from you in that period of time. So by delivering your answers in a structured manner, it really helps us quickly see and understand what your story was and how you behaved during that experience. Some of you may have heard of a couple structures. STAR is a very, very popular one: situation, task, action, and result. PAR, P-A-R, is another one I've heard: problem, action, result. They all roughly follow that same sort of structure in a nutshell. You want to make sure you're hitting upon those main points during the delivery of your story. And this is ultimately where your interview coaches can help you the most. And even if it's not an interview coach, this is where practicing helps you the most. If you were to, after this call, go and find a mirror somewhere, right, and talk to yourself in a mirror for 60 seconds nonstop, that's a lot of talking. I've been talking at you just on this slide for about 3.5 minutes. That's a lot of talking. If you can help just coach yourself or use the advice of a coach to be able to narrow down your delivery, to be structured and to be confident, that is going to make you come across as the strongest candidate you possibly can in an interview situation. And this is then tying back then to this third principle here: less is more. Really make sure that you are taking, ironically, the time to practice and shorten down your answers to be concise enough where you've captured my attention. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is matching up with some of the things that I'm looking for in a candidate. I'm now inspired, or I'm now, I now want to ask follow-up questions to your story. I now really want to understand, okay, well, why did you take that certain approach? Why did you use, this language versus that language? Why are you using this technical, approach versus that technical approach? By making sure you're being a little bit on the concise side with your delivery, it's really going to help your chances out here in an interview process. And again, this all goes back to practice. And I know Teresa mentioned it. I'm going to mention it probably a couple more times. It comes down to practice here. You need to be able to listen to the question that has been delivered to you. You need to then suddenly think about what your situation, what your story is going to be. You then need to structure it, and then you need to deliver it. In reality, you're probably going to take just a couple seconds to do all of this. This is where practice, this is where coaching can really help you, because you then have a safe space, a safe environment to do this in without jeopardizing the potential result of the interview at the end of the day. And if you've gotten your way to a hiring manager interview for a great company, you don't want to jeopardize that. And that's why we're here to help. So you've answered all the questions, right? You've aced the interview. The hiring manager, this opaque image of a question mark on a new team member is now replaced with your face. Now what? Now what do you do here? Well, for here, this is actually where a lot of coaches can add more support, where I don't think people really consider typically what we can do. Interview coaches, hiring managers, anyone who's been a former recruiter, this is where we can kind of go for that, what I call post-offer support, right? You've nailed the interview, you've got the job, the offer is in your inbox typically, because everything's of course virtual nowadays. What do you do now? Well, we're here to still help you. We're here to still support you and guide you through this final process, because at the end of the day, you're entitled to negotiate. You're entitled to ask questions. This is a completely normal thing to do. I know there are a lot of cultural differences depending on where you come in the world, and that's completely fine. But a lot of things that candidates don't think about are the options of, can I negotiate? What is a realistic counteroffer? What can I negotiate? I know that might sound silly, but you immediately go to a salary, right, or a bonus. Maybe you can get some share options potentially. A lot of major companies, Google, of course, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, they're offering shares now as part of their offer packages. Maybe you can negotiate and get some more of that. All of this plays into this post-offer support, and we can be the guides to help you with that and understand, okay, what have you said during the interview process that might formulate what the offer actually looks like? Alternatively, what have the recruiters or hiring managers said in the process that might set up your expectations on what to expect? There is nothing worse in the hiring journey, the recruitment journey, the interview journey, whatever you want to call it. There is nothing worse than at the end of an interview process, you get an offer and it is miles away from what your expectations are. And you go, well, hold on a second. Why is this? We are way off base in terms of what I was expecting. It's embarrassing for the recruiter. It's maybe even a little bit embarrassing for you as a candidate. By thinking about all the different communication that has happened throughout the course of the interview process, this can really help you when it comes to getting the offer, negotiating the offer, and ultimately making sure you get the best deal possible for yourself. In some instances, some roles, there is just no room for negotiation. That happens, okay? It is not the end of the world. It is what it is. But most of the time, there's a little bit of room for negotiation. And chances are the worst thing that's going to happen if you ask and say, would you mind if I negotiate? What are your thoughts on this? The worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to say, no, unfortunately, we just can't do that right now. Okay, you still have the offer at the end of the day. It's still, chances are, a great offer for a great company. We can still support you, if you want to still push back or whatever that is. So again, by having kind of this coach in your corner, it can really help to make sure that you understand what you're getting from your offers and potentially maximizing what that looks like. So the other thing that we wanted to talk to you about here today was the interview process 2021. And I think we could probably expand this out a little bit and say changes to the interview process, let's call it since COVID, unfortunately, hit our worlds, about just over a year or so ago. And so Teresa and I will kind of both, tackle this together in terms of what changes we have seen in the process. For many of you who are actively interviewing right now, You've probably seen a couple things that might be different, such as virtual interviews instead of in-person interviews, although that's slowly changing depending on where you are in the world. Video submissions are now becoming pretty common for a lot of more junior roles where there might be a lot of candidates all going for positions. Companies are asking you to almost take a video of yourself, describing yourself, your projects, things like that, and submitting it into the recruiters. I've seen that in several instances, and that's a very, very unique change, which has happened recently. Technical difficulties, or I call them life difficulties. Maybe you have a dog running through your house with a bone, clattering on tile floors. Who knows? Internet outages, things like that. These are all things that we are seeing in the world of the last couple of years, or the last year or so. But what I want to stress to anyone in the interview process is everyone's experiencing these things, right? Everyone is going through the exact same thing that you probably are experiencing or going through as it pertains to a different world or a different experience. And when I say everyone, I don't just mean everyone as a candidate, I mean the interviewers as well. They are probably juggling very different lives when they worked in their offices from wherever they were, and they're now in a home office with kids, with their significant others, with Mother Nature, anything like that. You really must remember that everyone is going through this at the same pace. And so if something happens, if there's a technical difficulty, don't worry. If your dog runs through, don't worry. If you have to do a video submission of yourself, don't worry about it. It happens. Just compose yourself, laugh it off in the case that I do. That's just my usual answer to these things. And just try to make sure that you're there to present yourself as a human. We're all human. All these things are going to happen at some point. Teresa, I don't know if you kind of wanted to chime in with some of the interview processes you've seen differently.
Sure, thanks, Rich. So, virtual on-site is definitely new, right? And it feels like an oxymoron over there because we used to call it phone interview and then the on-site interview, but now we still call it an on-site interview, but then it's virtual. So it's definitely something new for everybody, like Rich mentioned, not just the candidate, but for the interviewer as well. And there are little things that we might not think about in the past when we are physically on site, such as taking a break in between sessions. Because in the past, when you change interviewer, you probably get a few minutes break, grab some water, bio break, and those things might not be there when you're on Zoom, right, or any video conferencing platform. So it's just a click of a button. So that sometimes we do need to be mindful about having those mini breaks, because not just yourself, but the interviewers probably also need that break as well. And that's probably help reset in between sessions. And then the multi-day interviews, I feel that, Rich, maybe you can chime in with this, because I feel that it's something become more frequently happen for the virtual on-site, because since it's all on the video conference, so that it's easy to split across multiple days, so that now your interview day is not just one day. It's across multiple days. But then in terms of scheduling, it's probably a little easier from the coordination perspective that way, such that now the mindset becomes, okay, I maybe get up early, ace all my 5 sessions, and I'm done. But now it's actually expanded a little across multiple days, so that don't relax too much after your first day. But then at the same time, that is also an opportunity for you to reflect and see, okay, how do I adjust or reposition myself for the next day? So it's also an opportunity there. And then for the technical interviews, it's not uncommon to use online collaborator, even for on-site interviews. Some companies, like Amazon, they like to use whiteboard. I know some other companies will also provide computers so that they do online collaboration. But then the interesting part is the activities that you do on a whiteboard. For example, things come to mind is the system design question. So now you are virtual. How do you do a system design exercise, right? So some people will have pens and paper ready, and then they draw on it and show it on the camera. That works. But then sometimes depends on your camera quality, right? And also internet connection. It might be difficult to read. So many companies will start using the virtual whiteboard. I know Zoom has one, and then there are a few others more tailored or designed towards technical exercise, like Excalibur Draw is one that comes to mind. And I would suggest, when you have time, try it on the platform and learn about all those tools, right? So that when you get to your session, it's no longer, looking around, say, how do I draw a box? How do I draw a circle? Or how do I scroll? Or where's my stuff? Because some whiteboards, they actually extend infinitely in all directions. So you might lose your stuff that way. So there are little things that you can get yourself familiar with the tool. And I think majority of they are, even though the tool, the icon may be different, but then the functionality are similar. So get yourself familiar with those tools so that when you get to the session, you can focus on the exercise, but not the tool, using the tool. And one more thing come to mind when Rich mentioned video submission. What comes to my mind is I noticed expansion usage on the online assessment. So to my knowledge, the online assessment is quite common already for technical screening, like software screening. So the initial round of interview, instead of doing a phone interview, is an online exercise. But I also noticed this has expanded beyond technical positions. So some position like maybe program manager or even product manager, they actually start doing online assessment as well, so that they have questions or exercise to do on a computer, or some might be a video submission. Maybe both. They complement each other. But then I also noticed the expansion on this as well. And last thought I have is I think like all these bubbles, they're gonna stay for a little while longer, right? It's not just for 2021. I actually tend to think the virtual on-site, there's a good chance that it might become a permanent option for most of the candidates. Now people are getting used to them, so that why not to have additional options, right? And also, even though some business offices are opening up, but it still takes time for people to return to office. So, and I tend to believe priorities is to get the employees back first, and while for safety of the candidate and the interviewers as well, then the virtual on-site or virtual interview might stay a lot longer that way.
Yeah, Teresa, I think you're right there 100%. The virtual on-sites, I don't think are necessarily going to go away anytime soon. I think the other thing that's important to remember here for anyone watching this is, at the end of the day, things have shifted, but not necessarily completely done a 180 change. In much the same fashion that you would want to make sure you arrive plenty of time to avoid traffic and everything else to get to your on-site in-person interview. Now you just want to make sure you give yourself that extra time to make sure you're technical. You don't have any technical difficulties, right? That your computer works, that your webcam's okay, that your lighting is good, whatever that wants to look like, right? It hasn't necessarily fundamentally shifted in terms of what you need to do for the interview process. It's all just about the mediums that are now being used when it comes to the interview process. Whiteboarding. If you're in a room preparing for an interview, you make sure the pens work. Same thing that you would want to do here. You want to make sure that technically you're comfortable with the platform that you're going to be using as well. And you brought up a really good point around the multiple day interviews as well. I think this is something which there's a lot of research out there right now that's saying that countries are almost adopting very different practices. There's almost like a different norm now. So for example, in India, we are seeing a lot of what used to be multi-day or multi-week interview processes all now condensed into one day, particularly for high volume technical roles, software engineers in particular. We're seeing companies do 8-hour nonstop, like back-to-back interviews, because they don't have to worry about the transportation or the logistics anymore. They can just do it online and get everything done quickly. I have seen and heard of instances where a candidate has quite literally started the interview process on a Friday and has an offer on a Saturday night. It can go that quickly. But still, again, it depends for a lot of more maybe senior roles, mid to senior level roles. I think there are still going to be some pauses or some gaps in the interview stages. And this just gives you a great opportunity to make sure, you're asking for feedback, you're taking breaks wherever you can, whatever you do, don't burn yourself out when it comes to doing interviews. You really want to make sure you're being as naturally you as you possibly can. And even if that means to your coordinator or whoever it is that's scheduling your interview, just saying, could I get a couple minutes like break in between? just ask for it. Again, it's totally normal. We're all in this together. We all are going through all of this in the same way. So that just be another couple bits and pieces, I would say, as it pertains to this, the new normal, which is a phrase that gets thrown around way too much. All right. With that being said, then, yeah, I guess we'd love to open up to questions from Karen. I know you've been looking online for the chat, but if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask away.
Yeah, exactly. We have some questions posted into the chat, and I will start actually with the latest one. Sorry for everyone else who asked first, but because it's very much related exactly with what we just finished. This is like how this whole recruiting process has been affected by the COVID crisis. And Lubert Roxas asked, how did overseas hiring get affected by COVID? And how does it look post-COVID? And I would stress this second part, because this is like how it got affected by COVID. It was like exactly the past slide which we discussed, Teresa and Rich. But what do you think? How the recruiting world will look like post-COVID? Because it seems like we are like this crisis is passing right now, hopefully for the whole world. But it will definitely leave some kind of footprint. It will change some things structurally. They will be never the same. What do you think? And you can speculate if you want. What will stay here with us from this crisis?
I think from my perspective, and based on a lot of the research that I've been seeing and doing, really it's just the flexibility and implementation of virtual as well as physical in-presence interviews. I don't think that's going to go away, even if magically tomorrow we all get a green light to say, hey, we can all work from offices all over again. We have seen, and we broad term, speaking of course of all people, but we have seen that companies can still be very effective working virtually. We can still conduct interviews virtually very successfully. We can still find great talent. Candidates can still give the best version of themselves virtually. I don't think that's going to go away in the future. I think there will always be an element of that moving forward. I think there is something, though, to be said around organizations and what their culture is and how much of a virtual environment they want to implement. For anyone who's reading things in the news about corporate, large multinationals in general, all the rage right now is, what are they doing? Are they all at home remote for the rest of their careers, or are they back in the office? What's their strategy? Is it this? Is it that? And I think depending on the company is what's going to depend on how your interview process is going to go. Off the top of my head, Goldman Sachs is a big one right now. They've said that they absolutely want all of their employees back in the office. They've not been a big fan. The CEO has not been a big fan of this remote environment, even though they've been successful doing it. I would imagine if you're going to go for an interview at Goldman Sachs, at least in the US, I would suggest probably Europe too, chances are there might be an in-person element of that interview process in the near future. Maybe not today, but in the near future. Whereas like a Twitter or CrowdStrike, which is another up-and-coming SaaS organization, they're remote first. They are going completely remote and by all accounts are staying that way. I would imagine you're probably never going to have an in-person interview in that company again, unless there's some different circumstance to say otherwise. So I think it really is this virtual element is going to stay with us. It is going to flex and depend on the company.
Yeah. So what comes to my mind, it's in addition to the interview process, that going remote or hybrid mode with in-person and remote. I'm thinking because we spent the last 12 to 15 months, even originally started as in-person or in a physical office location, right? But the team become a remote team, or work from our own home. To some company actually open up this opportunity, or they have a little shift to incorporating a remote team as well. So there's some companies that might not, like Amazon in the past, typically opt for in person or in the same office that way. But now they also have a little shift into okaying having some remote team, maybe a remote team work at a different office location. But then that's something that may not be an option in the past. And for that, I observed there are more opportunities for people in terms of job searching now. So that they can apply to, maybe you're in the US East Coast, they can apply to positions based on the West Coast and still able to work efficiently that way as well.
Yeah, I firmly agree with that as well. I've seen some research to say that we've seen upwards of 100% increase on job postings that now say flexible for remote opportunities as compared to what we saw, a couple of years ago. That's very much the case. And I agree entirely. I think that's going to stick as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these are great points. And I would like to add just a couple of things to this mix is that, now the companies know that this is actually possible. Maybe some high-tech companies used to work remotely or use conferences on a daily basis. Now every company knows that it actually it's possible. There is life behind whatever in person and on site. That's one thing. That's just a fact. Another thing is all these companies now have the tool set in place for the remote setup. Before, it was just a burden to figure out how to organize this whole thing. Now they worked at least 1 year straight in this environment. They tried stuff out, threw some of the stuff away. Someone prefers Zoom, someone prefers Google Meet. All these tools have evolved also in this short time. New tools popped up, but also Zoom and Google Meet evolved and they added more features, they listened to their customers. So this whole thing, it's just welcoming to continue in this mode. And now they know, it's also possible. Why not do this, And yeah, I think this is just a great setup for the future, even without the pandemic. And I hope really that this pandemic will go away forever, hopefully. Let's see. Okay, great. Let's switch to the next question. And I don't know, maybe it will be too specific, but I will still read it and you decide. This is a question from Srinivas. And the question is, what are the best practices to focus on AWS technical program managers role interviews? I think it's very specific to the specific role, and we might have no experience with this position whatsoever, but we're talking here about the AWS, what is a daughter of the Amazon corporation. And Teresa, maybe you can just give a couple of hints or advices, because it seems to be a technical program manager. It's very responsible, very high position as well.
Mm-hmm.
What they will be looking for. Sorry.
The question is how to prepare for an AWS technical program manager, which is a TPM interview. Yes. So just at a high level, first of all, is a technical program manager. So definitely there's a technical knowledge specifically in terms of AWS technology, right? And having a good understanding of that. So that's one. And then the next thing is actually applicable to all positions, have a good understanding of the hard skills, which I typically use the word technical, but then in this context, it's not like the engineering technical, right? It's the technicality to perform for this particular job function, for program manager, probably surrounding project execution, maybe status reporting, removing roadblocks for your cross-functional teams, these kind of technicality, which is the hard skill for the position. And then, of course, there's the soft skills, right? Which is the behavioral interview questions. So at the high level, first have a good understanding of these 3 areas. And then, then you still mean into analyzing the job description, like Rich mentioned earlier, to learn about what are the very specifics, right? In terms of AWS technology, is it specifically to 1 or 2 services, or maybe more broad as a solution architect, right? And then also some of the hard skills, soft skills that matters, right? If it's a position that need interfacing with external customers, then maybe customer obsession, is higher up in the ranking versus some other leadership principles as well. So the job description actually contains a wealth of information in there. So spend time to look at it and analyze it. And that probably gives you some direction in terms of your preparation as well.
Yeah, I can only just add from my side. I think with AWS and Amazon in general, it's super important to know the 14 leadership principles. They will hire people who understands and believes and lives them, but they might not hire people who are technically very savvy but don't pay enough attention to this. This is a part of their corporate culture mindset, I would even say. And I also used to ask a lot of Amazon people after they used to work like for a few years at the company, do you still think it's super important as it's kind of announced and promoted? They said, yeah, it's absolutely super important. They have a badge, it's a plastic badge, and behind the badge, these are 14 principles are listed there. So they have it very close from their heart once on the lanyard, you know.
So Karen, I think Amazon probably one of the company who more like vocal about their leadership principle, which is the soft skills. But I would think soft skills is actually applicable across all companies hiring, right? Because it tells you how well that person fit into the company culture, even though every company has a different culture per se, but then knowing how they fit in is still the same process. And I can't imagine, any hiring manager will only hire based on soft skills or hard skills, but not both, right? You're probably looking for a balance between the two. And you mentioned, for Amazon, it's definitely the leadership principles, and there are 14 of them. There are a lot. But let me share a little secret with you. Not all leadership principles weigh the same for different positions. And that is why, really have a good read of your job description. That would tell you which ones has a higher influence. Like I just mentioned, the example, if your position require interfacing with external customers, then probably a good story surrounding customer obsession will have a higher influence towards your interview outcome versus, I don't know, something maybe dive deep. Maybe your position actually less needing dive deep, but more work across functionally. Then a good story in dive deep, yeah, it's a good story, but it might not move the needle that much. And also having a good understanding of the interpretation of the leadership principle as well. Because sometimes at the surface, yes, we understand what they mean, like ownership or deliver result. But then again, Amazon specific, bar raising. Is your story, bar raising enough? Yes, it's a good story, but sometimes they might not be bar raising enough to, again, move the needle. And that is where the gap comes in often, from my observation, that people think they deliver a good story, but then it doesn't influence the outcome. And why is it ineffective? And that's why.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for the insights. Now we have actually a question for Rich because it's related to Apple, and the question is being asked by Atira Krishna. For Apple interview, if a candidate is rejected after the third round, is there a freezing period to apply or to shortlist again?
Great question. Is there a formal freezing period? No. Should you wait a little bit before you reapply? Yes. If you have been rejected, frankly, at any stage of the interview process, what you want to try to do as much as you can is ask your interviewer, the hiring managers, whoever it is, for feedback. Understand the why. Understand the reason as to why they did not decide to move you forward. In many cases, it could just be that there were some better candidates in the mix who they just felt more closely aligned to the position. That's okay. In some instances, a recruiter will actually tell you, well, actually, when it comes to delivering your answer, maybe you were a little long-winded, maybe you don't have the required experience that we're actually looking for. Your knowledge of so-and-so, technical knowledge is just not quite at the level that we were, hoping for. If you just reapply again the next day, chances are nothing has changed, right? Or even the week after, chances are nothing has changed to that. A good rule of thumb would be, in my opinion, give yourself a solid 3 to 6 months at least to go away, work on the skills that you think either were told to you that were your weaknesses, or that through self-evaluation you think that you were weak on, and then come back as a stronger candidate. I have seen many instances the same candidate names just keep coming through very short after, if not immediately after the interview process. it's not fair on the other candidates who haven't had a chance to interview for us not to meet them and see if they could be a good match. And at the end of the day, if you're not giving yourself time to become a better candidate or to truly learn how to better tell your story, it really is honestly a waste of your time more than anything else. And at the end of the day, a recruiter doesn't want to keep rejecting people. It's the worst part of a recruiter's job is to say no, sorry, and rejecting candidates. It really is. We don't get any pleasure or enjoyment out of it whatsoever. So we'd much rather you give yourself some time, get prepared, become a stronger candidate, and come back ready to tackle that interview process again at a later date. Again, my rule of thumb, 3 to 6 months. Apple doesn't necessarily have a strict policy on that. I know most recruiters, though, are probably going to wait, at least 3 to 6 months. Some companies, it's up to a year. They say, hey, come back in a year, if not more, before you can reapply. It depends. But yeah, for Apple, there's no strict policies.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. We have the second question from the same person, and it is also, is it good to apply to the same company with different resumes, customizing the job requirements? For example, DevOps engineer and site reliability engineer. These are barely very close positions. Like there are still some differences, but what's your thoughts on that?
That's a really good question. So there's two parts of that, I think. Number one, you should absolutely customize your resume to the role that you are applying for. Hands down, I believe that is the best approach because your backgrounds and experiences, if you keep your resume super general, it's not going to be super attractive to me as a recruiter or to a hiring manager if it doesn't scream the position or the experiences that I'm ultimately wanting to find in my next associate. So using job descriptions, using the research and the preparation that you're going to do for the role, tailor your resume. Always tailor your resume. Should you apply for multiple different jobs in the same organization if they are similar? Yes, up to a point. And so I put a big asterisk next to this. If I'm looking through my applicant tracking system at all the candidates that are applying to roles, it's going to tell me how many roles you have applied for. 99 times out of 100, all applicant tracking systems do this. If I see a candidate has applied to 45 different positions at my company, that's not a good look. There's no way that's going to be a good look for me because it could signal to me that you don't necessarily know what you actually want to do. Ultimately, you don't really know where your passions might lie, and you're just doing anything you can to get into the company, which is fine. I completely understand. Amazon, Apple, prime examples. Back when I was at Apple, I think we used to have, it was like 19,000 candidates for every one single job opening. I get that a lot of people want to work for those companies, but do not go and apply for every single role that you could possibly find. If you've got DevOps engineers, site ops manager, things like that, and you're talking about like 3 or 4 that are very, very similar in nature, I think that's okay. I have no problem seeing a candidate applying for 2 or 3 roles that are very similar. You do actually have the experience. Maybe your past roles have been both of those roles, all 3 of those roles. That's fine. But as soon as I see candidates with, frankly, more than 10 or 15 different applications for different roles, it throws up some red flags to a recruiter and to a hiring manager as well. If they say, I've seen this person before, or didn't they interview for so-and-so's role on their team? It raises some questions.
Great. Thanks, Rich. And I have a next question from Mary Lee C. And any of you can please take it. The question is, what's a polite way to tell the interviewer that you need the hiring timeline to move quickly? And then the next question, because your other interviews are moving more quickly?
Yeah, Teresa, I don't know if you wanted to go for this one.
Yeah, I'll take a hit on this. So a polite way to tell the interviewer you need to move up your interview timeline, right? And typically it boils down to your reason behind it, why, right? And if you ask me, a genuine answer honest answer usually works the best, right? It's not just because that, oh, you know, just because you want to move quicker, right? But because you have other interview going on, and you have other offers that may be requiring you to make a decision, so that, you know, sharing that information actually helps the coordinator who's, you know, scheduling your interview, or even the hiring manager and hiring team, to understand your situation. And typically, I actually haven't seen any cases that they cannot accommodate, or they will do their best to accommodate, as long as you have a legit reason.
Yeah, I second that. A legitimate reason, explain your why, be as honest as you can, and be just transparent. Be very upfront with your recruiters. If you're speaking to a recruiter specifically, because that's usually who you're going to have this conversation with, is my guess, respect their time, right? If you know that they've told you, listen, our process takes 6 weeks, we have very little wiggle room, you have 8 more interviews to go, but you know you're going to get an offer potentially for a company tomorrow or the next day, just let them know and say, hey, you know, I'll be honest with you, I do have an offer potentially coming through, or, you know, I'm interviewing at 2 or 3 other companies who've said that I will be through their process in the next week. Do you have any flexibility? Just ask. Be very, very courteous and respectful. This is not the first time that a recruiter has probably got that question, or a hiring manager has been put into a situation where they might need to speed something up. But the best thing you can do is just politely ask. There's no way to do it. It's just saying, you know, hey, please, you know, is there a time frame? How many more interviews might I have left? Here's why I'm asking that question. It's because I have this coming on board. Yeah, I would just be as courteous as you can and as transparent as you can.
Great. So we move to the next question. It's from Lakshminder Singh. Nowadays, recruiter wants you to have knowledge of all the things in the world. ? If I speak honestly that I haven't worked on this tech yet, but it ends up hurting my chances. How do we address that? And just before you answer, guys, let me just quickly confirm that the tech is growing. The tool set is also growing. The landscape is expanding. There are more tools, more open source, closed source projects, which as a professional you have more or less have to be familiar with. And it's a little bit crazy, I must confirm. I'm like, it's especially for junior professionals. That's why we have communities like this, where you meet with your peers, exchange and share best practices. And of course, it's overwhelming to see all these buzzwords and difficult sometimes to understand what's actually behind it. But you know what? In the job ad, you will be most usually have the list of the technologies which are you expected at least to know, and there will be often the classification to which degree you have to know them. So before you go into the interview, at least make sure to prepare specifically for this text. And if you, Rich or Teresa, want to answer this, please feel free.
So if you don't mind, Rich, I'll go first. So for technical knowledge, I mean, like you mentioned, there are just endless different technologies out there. It's not possible to know it all. So, you know, and for the technical interview I did in the past, even for now that I help my clients to prepare, you know, every single time I will tell them, you know, use the programming language that's of your choice. You know, unless the position is specifically looking for a very like knowledge in a specific technology. Let's say it's a web development, they need React.js, right? Then yes, you definitely need that knowledge. But then in terms of more general, then any programming language is fine. If I do a design questions, then it can be any design question, right? It doesn't have to be a web, it doesn't have to be mobile, and the question usually phrased in a way that it can be any one of them. The idea behind it is do you have the fundamentals? Right? If you understand the fundamentals, so even though maybe you have been coding in Java your whole life, and we are coding in Python, but then to me, having a fundamental, then it boils down to a matter of maybe a training course, which is very doable, right? Then it boils down to what are your fungible skills. And if they are fungible, then everything else become just a coaching, right? Take a course, right? Or maybe have a mentor at work. However, if you lack the fundamentals, then it might be difficult to work with. And for that, going back to the questions, then if the position is looking for very specific model development or machine learning, then yes, those are non-negotiable. Then make sure you have those. But other than that, focus on the fundamentals. How well is your coding? How well do you understand the algorithms or data structures, such that even though you might not be using a specific data structure that I hope for, but then as long as you are able to solve the problem using different ones and you can explain the reason why, that's good enough, honestly. And in most cases, that actually, will pass the interview as well. I hope I answered the question. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Rich, do you want to add anything to it, or we can?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I do a lot of analysis on job descriptions from a lot of different companies right now, and there's a very interesting shift in the amount of required skills, qualifications, must-haves, however you want to title it, that we're seeing on job descriptions right now. There's a couple different reasons for that. First of all, it could be that the recruiting team is trying to attract the most amount of candidates possible, and that you don't have to have all 45 qualifications there. They just want to make it appealing so that if you do have this but not that, if you do have a little bit of this but you're not so strong at that, you'd still be encouraged to apply. That is quite often the case. But I also think it ties back to, and I think Teresa kind of touched upon it as well, it ties back to the fact that if you're in a conversation with a recruiter and they say to you, okay, do you have XYZ skills, Node, React, Python, Java, whatever it is, you go, actually, I only have Java and Python. That's okay, because you can then add as part of your story, but there are some other ones I'm actually currently learning right now, or I'm actually signed up to do a little bit of, a new course on this. You know what? I actually didn't know Java 6 months ago, and I was able to learn that in a really short space of time. What are your predominant, languages that you're using? Oh, well, actually, we use this. Oh, okay, yeah, this makes sense. I've actually touched upon that a little bit. Whatever it is, you can still tell your story, even if you don't have all of the requirements. And I think it's just important to remember, because you do have the ability to grow into a role. You have the ability to learn and to progress. And, I think if the role is going to be right for you, if you're that sort of person who likes to learn and grow and progress, then they're going to take you on board and they're going to, move you through the process and ultimately hire you. I would honestly be a little cautious around a company that's like, no, if you do this and you can't do anything else other than this ever again, we don't want to talk to you. I would really, do some research and think about if that's going to be the right place ultimately for you and what you want out of your career.
These are so-called fixed mind companies, I guess, and there are also fixed mind candidates which just learned a language and they never want to learn anything else. So it's neither a good company nor a good candidate or a employee, I guess. But there are some. You're right, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's a matching game, right? It's a two-way street. You want the company to be a fit for you as well as you to be a fit for the company. And so there are 100% companies that are out there that have a slightly more limited mindset, fixed that have a massive growth mindset, where I've seen job descriptions that it's like 3 bullet points. Are you super creative? Do you like helping out clients? And these are for, product designer roles. Like, oh, okay, you're really open-minded to the types of candidates that you want to have. Great, go for them, apply. If that's the sort of environment you want to be in, then absolutely look for them. They're out there and they do exist.
I'd like to add a point to what Rich mentioned about growth potential, because often, yes, when you first hire into a company, yet there are certain tasks that already waiting for you to work on, right? But then technology change, company change as well. I just take Amazon, since that's where my background is. Maybe 10 years ago, internally might not be using a lot of AWS technology, honestly, and now everybody's shifting. So if you join the company back then, chances are they will not test you on any AWS knowledge, right? But the thing is, if you have the fundamentals, and if you have worked on large scale system, then your growth potential, right, learning those new technology and growth with the company is actually more important than what you have at what your skills at a specific point in time. And that is why often it's the fungible skills that matters. And whether if you don't have a particular skills, then it might not be as big of a deal breaker as you think it is.
I can only confirm it 100%. And there is a good example from my experience where last year I was interviewed for an AWS position, and I was clear that I'm not a professional in AWS. I mean, it was 2020 already, they are 12 years into the market. Every year they are leading the market. And I still said, yeah, I'm just like a cloud computing generalist, like familiar with Google or Azure or whatever, And I said, that's okay. Don't worry about it. As long as you know the fundamentals. And he asked me about like, what would you do once you set up the system? What would be the next stage? Monitoring, like fixing the bugs and stuff like this. So once you understand the fundamentals, that's perfectly okay with them if you are familiar with a similar but a different technology. And they will teach you. That's why they will hire you, and they will teach you. You will pass their own certification and so on and so forth. So just only confirming, Teresa, you mentioned like back in the days, it's still up to date now. It's still the same mindset. They look for the fundamental skills. Great. Now let's move to the next question. And Teresa and Rich, I think we have like 10 minutes more, right? And then we will wrap up. Great. So Rajesh is asking, how a recruiter filtering the good resume or any tool used?
How are they filtering the candidates using tools?
I guess how they find the good resume in a like huge bunch of like resumes which good company or tech companies receive on a daily basis, I guess. What is the process, I guess? Like,
yeah, 100%. No, that's actually a really good question, and I think it's one that a lot of times is misunderstood. So I think it's great to be able to answer that. Every major company has what's called an applicant tracking system, or ATS. This is where your resume goes, right? It goes into the system when you submit it for, again, any company in the world. All resumes will end up going to the position that you applied for to start with. Depending on the applicant tracking system, some of them have filters, which are able to essentially use machine learning, natural language processing in many cases, to screen the resumes and look for keywords. So, for example, if you are going for a role that is sales oriented, but you don't have any sales experience in your resume, and the filters are set up so that it excludes those candidates, it's a good chance that you might get an automatic rejection because of the criteria that hiring team has set in terms of the candidates that they want to see. A lot of times this can be very, very disheartening for candidates. It's happened to me several times when I've applied for other roles. You apply, you get a rejection within 20 minutes. Oh, they never had a chance to look at my resume. Most of these applicant tracking systems are very, very good at being able to filter out candidates that ultimately there is a much greater chance of that candidate being a good fit, a good match for that role than as compared to other candidates. We have to remember that recruiters, that for jobs that are for these great companies that are out there, we are literally getting hundreds, if not thousands of applicants every single day. There has to be a process to get those numbers down so that we can then focus on good candidates. Once that initial screen's out the way, we might be left with several hundred resumes, candidates to look at. And this is actually a very, very manual process at this point. Most recruiters probably spend a couple hours each day logging in, going to their applicant tracking system, and just going through each resume as much as they can, looking for the key skills and key experiences that their hiring manager has expressed to them that they want to see. I want to see someone from a top 20 Fortune or a Fortune 100 company with a minimum of 10 years experience. Guess what? If you have 5 years of experience and you're not in that list, there's a chance that you're going to get excluded from that. There's no malice behind it or anything like that. We're just trying to get the numbers down so that we can find the great candidates that are going to be that match. ultimately it is a respect thing. We want to respect your time just as much as we, hopefully you respect our time as a recruiter. We would hate for you to be put into an interview process with only a couple years of experience for a position that has 10 plus, whatever it is, only for us then to reject you straight away or just say, hey, this is not a good role for you. That doesn't feel good. Even if you think it might feel good because, I got to a recruiter and the recruiter just, reject, it doesn't feel good at all. We really want to limit the amount of heartbreak that we give to candidates. And so that's why we have these filters and these processes in place. What's going to help you stand out though, honestly, at a minimum is meeting the requirements. Do your research, read the job descriptions. If it's saying, and again, I'm using this as an example, if it's saying 10 years of experience and you have 9 years of experience, I would probably still apply to that, right? I would still go for that because there's usually some wiggle room for most orgs. If you have 5 years of experience or below that, really think long and hard about, if it makes sense to apply, to take the time to customize your resume, to then submit it, and then, to ultimately potentially get the rejection email. It's sometimes just not worth it at the end of the day. But read the job description, do research online. There are so many job board forums, Glassdoor, Indeed. They all have, Caris is one. They all have tips and tricks on what do companies look for. What are their key skills, things like. Just do your research. And if you match up with all of those things, awesome, go for it, apply. And I bet you more often than not, you're going to get seen by a recruiter at some stage. But you just got to make sure you're actually meeting the requirements of the role to get seen. That's the real basics of it all.
That's a great answer, Rich. Thank you very much. Now let's move to the next question from Alexi. And it is, if I wish to have a particular field and the recruiter is offering another field, what should I do? Like, I'm interested in cloud or DevOps engineer role, but I'm offered support field. What, like, maybe just to think further what it might mean. It might mean that the recruiter who interviewed you thinks that your qualities may be more applicable to another position, which they also have like opening for this position. Or it's not necessarily that recruiter like thinks you are like absolutely a great match, but they just have, or this position has been filled meanwhile, and there is just a list of other positions, and recruiters not very specific about your matching. It would be the great thing, I guess, for the first case, that the recruiter feels that you're actually a greater match to a different position, which will be like a dream job for you and a dream candidacy for this job. But in some cases, especially with not very smart companies, they just have openings and they would say like, this position get closed, move to another one. This is what we have, still we got. Would you add anything to this?
No, I think you're right. It is slightly circumstantial in terms of how you approach that. If you're going through an interview process and a recruiter was to say to you, oh yeah, this role just got closed, we found a candidate, I might have something else available. Do you want me to throw your resume around? Take that with a little bit of caution, because that might just be an effort just to try to find you a place anywhere. It might not be what you actually want to do. You might not then enjoy the job. It's actually not going to help your career at the end of the day. If, on the other hand, I think like you just said there, if the recruiter says, you know what, I actually think you'd be a really good fit for this role instead, based on your experiences. I know the hiring manager, or I know the recruiter, they're looking, or they're open for someone who has that kind of, different kind of background. Let's do that. 100%, I would trust your recruiter in that instance in knowing, what could be a good alternate route to take. But it also just depends on what you want to do. If you have your heart completely set on DevOps and you want to do nothing else than that, then stick to your gut, right? Stick to what you want to do, and if that's what you want to do, go for it 100%, and find the role. Maybe take a step back, maybe go for a more junior role and work your way up. That's okay as well. a lot of companies though are looking for more well-rounded individuals that may have a little bit of support experience here, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and ultimately those experiences are going to make you a better, cloud engineer, DevOps engineer when you get to that role eventually. So it really does depend. There is no right or wrong answer to that, I don't think. But I would certainly just say, if you're in an instance where a recruiter at least says to you, hey, looking at your resume and your background, I think, we should really go here instead of there. Does that sound okay to you? I would trust them, because ultimately, at the end of the day, they are experts at their company and their roles. They should know a good candidate for a role when they see one.
Yeah.
So I like to share my thoughts on this. I agree with Rich thoughts as well. I'm just thinking that hiring is actually a two-way street, right? So in a way that let's say if I apply for a job, of course there are things I want from the job, right? Whether it's a career growth or getting into a new field and things like that. But then on the other side, as the hiring team, then for me is what you bring to the table that can help me. And often there is this, the scenarios comes up saying, hey, someone actually maybe has been in the DevOps, but then want to get into the cloud, or has been in support and want to get into a different field, such that, they wanted what they want to get doesn't match what they can give at the time. And, often when this scenario happen, then I will look at it and say, yes, I understand that your passion is maybe towards a different direction. But then if I set you up or pair you with an interview towards that direction, that is actually maybe lesser setting you up for success, because your strongest experience and strength might be towards a different direction, at least at this moment, such that for the interview success, that it might be better, at least at the current time, to go for the other direction, at least for now, right? But then I think ultimately it boils down to your career goal and passion, because like Rich said, if your passion is really towards the other one, then help me say yes to you, right? By maybe amending some of those experience or knowledge or skills, like in addition to what you have, such that when I look at your resume, then I can say, yes, you have, somewhat relevant skills. And in addition, you also have this other experience from support or customer, relationships, things like that. Then it makes it a lot easier for me to say yes, help me say yes to you.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Rich. I don't know, maybe we can just take a really last one, the short answer here or question. Luca is asking, what's the right duration of the answer for an Amazon interview? Maybe, Teresa, it's a great question for your experience and knowledge.
So I like to refer back to Rich's presentation as well. So yes, we might have a few minutes to deliver, but then if you ask me, it's less about the length, right? Minutes. It's about the content. Is it relevant? Is it structured so that I can understand or follow your story and thought process clearly? Does it have the level of details very specific, right? So that I can understand your step-by-step and why you did take those action and the reasoning behind it, such that I can get all the way to the bottom to understand your thought process. So, typically for maybe LP questions, you have maybe 5 to 10 minutes, including follow-up questions, right? But then that's just a general guideline. In the end of the day is whether you are able to provide me those details, or whether I can extract those details to use as evidence. Because there might be time that we just circling on the surface, so that maybe after 10 minutes, then we're actually out of time, then I have to stop or switch direction to a different questions. So it's less about the length, or maybe the first 5 minutes in, I realize that we are not going anywhere, then I switch question as well, in hope to get better evidence from a rephrased question. So it's the level of details and content, and less about the minutes.
Yeah, 100% agree. As long as you're getting across, as long as you're answering their question, right? Mm-hmm. As long as you're answering their question, as long as you are leaving, I do believe, as long as you leave yourself open for follow-up questions, that can be the most important thing. If you just do a monologue for 10 minutes and and you get, again, every detail out of the way, there is no room to learn even more. There's no room to kind of pivot and say, okay, well, why did you do that? There's no room for me as an interviewer to learn more about you. I would much rather a slightly more concise, but still detailed response that enables me then to go, interesting. Okay, I have some follow-up questions. I want to learn more about you. You either have typically a half an hour or an hour to learn as much as you can about that person and to make that impression. The more opportunities they have to ask questions to match you to what they're looking for, that's all it is. Like Teresa's very first slide, matching them. As long as you're able to do that, you're gonna be in a good place.
Yeah, the risk for monologue is it closes off all the possibility to pivot or leeway into different directions. And often, the interviewer asks you a question, and you might not know which LPs or which direction that they're gonna go, right? And most likely it can go to any direction. So it is the follow-up question that will lead you down to the path that's the interviewer needs so that they can gather the relevant evidence, right? You might think, oh, he's asking for this thing, but turns out they're looking for something different. Now you leave yourself, keep your option open to move around with the interviewer.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't pretend to know exactly everything the recruiter is trying to ask or get at. You can do as much research as you want. You can talk to Teresa and I for hours on end for coaching. We still cannot tell you exactly what that recruiter is 100% looking for and where they might want to take the conversation. So always leave yourself open for follow-ups. And as a fun fact, the longest interview answer that I've had, a monologue, is 27 minutes. I have had people talk at me nonstop for 27 minutes. Please don't ever do that in any situation with any company you ever have.
Rich, was it me?
What's that?
Was it me?
No.
Because I often have this flow, and this is like what I also can share, especially when I'm feeling confident, very confident about the answer, and I'm being asked at an interview, and then I kind of think very quickly, okay, I got this answer, but I have to tell the whole story. Let's begin from the end, and it will take time. And you will, at some point, sometimes people say like, okay, well, you're right, like move to the point. And this is like exactly what also was on the slide. And I think you, Rich, covered it during the presentation very nicely. Just be concise about make your point, make your statement, just in a couple of sentences, maybe, if it's possible. If it's a star system, then you have to tell a little bit more. Sometimes it's just a straight question. It just requires a straight answer. So deliver this answer. If you have some story, like some background story to tell, to explain even more, you can also mention, if you would like to learn more about it, I can elaborate on it. And leave the choice to the recruiter if they want to hear more. This is like the trick which can be applied here, but don't start like me, 27 minutes of the full story. They will probably fall asleep or will interrupt you, what is not very nice as well.
I would say 95% of the candidates I've ever spoken with, and we're literally talking thousands upon thousands of candidates, 95% all have a problem of being too long-winded and talking too long of their answers. It is by far and away the most common concern, shall we say, that interviewers would have with a candidate. Even the candidates that get the job probably are even still a little long-winded, but there's some sacrifices here, there, and everywhere. So don't ever feel, and this is for everyone who's watched this, don't ever feel as though it's just a you thing. You're the only person in the world who is long-winded. It's so many people have this as an area of opportunity to work on. And again, it's practice, and it's literally Teresa's my job to help with that as much as we can. So that's what we're here for.
That's great. People like you can immediately spot this behavior and can tune your answer, or train you. You can train this stuff. This is
100%.
Takes practice. Amazing. Guys, I can go for hours and hours talking to you. It's such an interesting topic, and this is such a huge flow of information and knowledge coming out of you. We have limited time. You have your stuff also to do. Thank you very much for this session. It was a huge pleasure talking to you. We also had, I think Daisy is still there. Daisy Popova from Karus.io is in the chat as well. She's supporting us there, answering the questions. Thank you very much, Daisy, for being with us here and supporting us as well. Let's say the final words, and we will wrap up this amazing session.
So thank you for having us. It's been a really fun event. And thank you for all the questions. Really good questions.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you for having us. Obviously, we're available. You have our names here. You can find us on LinkedIn, on Caris, etc. Our links are in the description of the video as well. Please do not hesitate to reach out and ask us questions. We're both in this profession because we love helping people out as much as we can, whether it's through sessions like this or just talking with you one-on-one. We're here to help, so don't be shy.
Exactly. So this video is streamed and is recorded and will be always available at this URL, what you are watching it right now. So come back to this video and watch this single sections if you need. Our amazing coaches are also available for the coaching, and I think you can also like have an initial session, I guess, for free, or how is it going? Something like this, exactly. So you will have all the contacts of the coaches and you can reach out to them with your questions. Stuff like this is not money spent, but money invested, because if you are preparing yourself in the right way for this stuff, you can land a much bigger and beautiful job with this knowledge and this experience from our coaches. So really make use of this opportunity. You see, this is just such a huge knowledge of experience and information. It's a win-win for everyone here. So thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure, and hopefully we will catch up also at a later point sometime and have another amazing discussion. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.